So it's a great pleasure to introduce someone where I don't have to go and Google them and look up their bio. It's kind of good. Paul was with us for, I reckon, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, just over 4 years.
Yeah, and we used to be over at TEV3 back in the halcyon days of plush digs and nice rooms to work in and stuff, and there were some really good times. And so delighted to welcome him back. He's had some great success since he left. Had great success here, and which continued after he left. York University.
Yeah.
A reader.
University of York, actually, because people get confused about that when people call it York University, and then the one in Ontario gets loads of content.
And we don't want to confuse that geography, do we? No. And having caught up with you and Lorna for dinner one night there back in 2014, I want to say. It's a lovely part of the world. And Paul's a reader, and that equates to an associate prof, which is great. Yeah. And then the next thing is a chair.
All being well. All Excellent. Being well.
Excellent. Yeah. Great to get an update on his work in men's health. Yeah, really looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I can't tell you how excited I am to be back. This is the first time I've been back in Vancouver since we left in 2010. I think it was 2010, it might have been 2011. So I was just telling John, I've been walking around campus a little bit, went up to my old apartment on Thunderbird Boulevard and took some pictures, and yeah, it's just so great to be back. So when I was putting this presentation together, if you read the intro or the bio to it, it was framed around the work that I've done on men, self-management support, and men with long-term conditions. As I was putting it together, I kind of came to the realization that a lot of the themes that came out of this work can be shared across other work that I've done in relation to men and access to health services. So I kind of brought a lot of those things together, both the work that I did when I was here at UBC and the work that I've done subsequently, including the work with men and long-term conditions. So I've kind of put together what I've called 8 top tips around how to make health services more accessible and acceptable to men. I tried to pick out 10 top tips, but I could only think of 8, so 8 will have to do. And we can obviously chat and talk afterwards, so if you've got questions as we go along, then feel free, both about my work or about anything else that I've been doing since I left here. Okay, so for those of you who are familiar with the work that I do, it's underpinned, like John's, by exploring how the social constructions of gender and masculinities intersect with men's experiences of health and illness, and in particular their interactions with health services in a variety of conditions. So it's all about gender and what we mean by gender, and I'm probably telling people who already know a lot about this issue here at the University of British Columbia. It's a socially constructed concept, what it means to be a man or a woman within a particular culture. It's historically informed, it's culturally contingent, it's based on and constructed in everyday interactions with both people and institutions and with society in general. And despite all that, there's a variety of different ways that gender can be constructed within societies. But what we focus on a lot in men's health is how dominant and culturally dominant ideals of gender interplay with health and illness. And that can be considered to be, in lay people's terms, what it means to be a real man or a real woman in society. And in sociological terms, it's considered to be hegemonic constructions, dominant constructions. And I've, obviously my daughter was born here at BC Women's, and since coming back to the UK, I've had a son. And it's almost been like an ethnographic experiment for me, seeing my kids grow up and seeing how powerful forces are in terms of promoting what gender appropriate behaviour for boys and for girls. It's astonishing. And I've tried really, really hard to not to enable them to see beyond the gender boundaries that they put into, but it is so pervasive in society. Despite us all, I mean, we've come on a long way over the last 10, 20, 30 plus years in becoming aware of those things. But still, you know, this still it happens, you know. Women and there's ideals around femininity, and there's ideals around men and how they should behave. And in terms of Western culture, these things are still a lot of these things are considered to be gender appropriate behaviours, emotions, feelings for men. And when John and I probably have, certainly when I started, and I imagine John as well, when we first started doing work in this area of men's health, a lot of these things were still very theoretical. There were sociological theories, and there might have been some empirical work that had been done by sociologists, but there'd been very few people who had actually connected these ideas around gender and male gender with how it might influence health and illness and health service delivery. But over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a great body of work that's been developed to show that actually these things do have an impact on men and their health, particularly these dominant ideals of masculinity, hegemonic masculinity, strength, stoicism, emotional invulnerability. Yeah, this I came across recently and I really liked, you know, like dying like a real man, acting like a real man. And one of the landmark papers in Europe was the State of Men's Health report, which was back at the beginning of 2001, that really put down a marker to say there is a strong gendered dimension that places men at higher risk of ill health than women in certain situations and contexts. So that's not to say that this is the only construction of gender for men, but a lot of the work has focused on this dominant sort of real men and how they behave. So my interest has been in how this influences men's help-seeking behaviour in the first instance, and then men's access and interaction with health services more generally. And there's some good epidemiological data to show that actually these things bear out when you look at some of the statistics. So this is a representation of men's and women's consultation rates with general practice, with primary care. This is in the UK. So the top line here is women, bottom line here is men, and then this line here is women's consultation rates when you take into account reproductive events. So even when you take into account reproductive events across the life course, men's access with primary care practitioners, with family physicians, is much lower than women's, except at the beginning and end of life, which is interesting. And taking a life course perspective is something that's worth noting as well when you're thinking about gender and health. My recent interest, though, has been in men's access and uptake of self-management support interventions when they live in and been diagnosed with a long-term condition, or what we used to call chronic illnesses, those that can't be cured but can be managed through treatment or lifestyle changes. And if you look across the different long-term conditions, then men's access and uptake of different services that are available is, at best, suboptimal, shall we say. It's lower than it should be, lower than we want it to be. So a lot of the evidence and a lot of work that I know that John's done has been around men with mental health problems. So if you look at it, this is a UK perspective, but it's replicated across Western societies. In the UK, we have this thing called IAPT. It's increasing access to psychological therapies. It's a way, a care pathway for getting people into talking therapies, CBT or other different talking interventions. And 38% of all those referrals are men. So the vast majority are female, but yet, 4/5 of all suicides, I think everybody will be aware, are by men. So there's a big disconnect there in terms of men's rates of suicide and their uptake of support services for mental health. That's also the same men. We have, do you have Desmond here? The diabetes self-management education program. Because this is the primary structured education program for people who are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. You're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, you get automatically referred to one of these structured education programs to teach you about what your diabetes is, how to manage it, the lifestyle changes that you want to make. Uptake of this program across the UK is poor generally, but 80% of non-attenders are men. That's just something that seems to have skipped under the radar at the moment, and that I've got a grant application going in to examine why that would be. But when we look at a lot of self-management support programs for people who are living with long-term conditions, are predicated on a peer support type of program where people go along. They're either disease-specific or non-disease specific and led by lay people. Some are led by health professionals as well. But men's uptake of these is poor. It's around something like 60 to 70% of non-attenders, those that are referred, are male. So there's a lot that needs to be done there in tackling uptake of support services for men who are living with long-term physical and mental health long-term conditions. Okay, so those are the problems, if you like, and we've done a lot of work in men's health scholars looking at why is that? Why do we see these patterns of uptake of health services? And originally, certainly historically, men were positioned as reluctant users, stubborn users, and it's an attitudinal problem. Actually, it's not. There's a lot of evidence to show now that when services are delivered in particular ways, men are very willing to engage and very interested in taking ownership and being empowered to take ownership of the health and access health services. So we've kind of begun to dispel this myth about it's not an attitudinal problem. It's a problem for health service delivery and thinking about how to deliver more appropriate services that are more responsive to both men's and women's needs. And sometimes gender is an important determinant of service uptake, just as we've recognised for a long time that things like ethnicity and socioeconomic status and age are important determinants. And I think Canada still leads the way in that. It's still a tough sell, this, in the UK. I will be dancing when we get our national funder, NIHR, which is analogous to CIHR, gets an Institute for Gender and Health. It's kind of just filtering a little bit that gender is an important determinant of health, but still it's a big sell. So we've done a lot of work on speaking with men, doing qualitative work around what are the problems, what are the barriers, how can those barriers be overcome. But we've still got a long way to go in developing an evidence base about how can we deliver services that remove those barriers, that lead to more effective services, more accessible services, more acceptable services. What does the health service delivery look like, and how can that be rolled out at scale? And that's my particular interest at the moment, about how to design services and test them in order to ensure that they lead to positive outcomes. So I've been doing work on men in this context in a range of different conditions. Young men with depression, which was involved with John when I was here. New fathers and their health over the perinatal period, which is in the period in pregnancy and then 1 year afterwards. Then with cardiovascular disease, and again more recently, men who are living with a variety of different long-term conditions. And so my original presentation was around, men with long-term conditions. How can we make services more accessible to those? And what does the evidence say? But like I said, when I kind of looked at all the findings from the other studies that we've done, some key themes. And so I've kind of brought all those themes together. 8 top tips, some exemplars of some work, excerpts from some of the publications that I've done from this, which will make clear, I think, some of the future direction of travel that we need to be thinking about in designing services. So what comes across really clearly in a lot of the evidence and the work that I've done around improving services so that they're more acceptable and accessible to guys is that men often want to see that there's a clear purpose to an intervention that they have been referred to or choose to access. So what is the point? If I go along to this, what am I going to get from it? Is there a tangible benefit? And making those things clear, the potential benefits of attending the intervention, can make services more appealing. So when we did our work reviewing the evidence on self-management support interventions for men, we found that those interventions that did market and men could see a clear purpose, it might have been, I will get more fit, I will get more knowledge and evidence, or I will be able to do X, Y, and Z afterwards, were seen as more appealing. And it gets back to the title of this presentation is just talking, I can't, or just doing an activity where I can't really see what the tangible benefit at the end of it is not as appealing to me. And so identifying what the unmet need is and how it would be addressed through the attendance of the intervention can make things a little bit more appealing and accessible. So we found that in men with long-term conditions, but we also found it in the work that we did on fathers and their mental health needs. The incidence of perinatal mental health problems in men, depression and anxiety, is around 10%. So about 1 in 10 guys who are new fathers experience some level of depression or anxiety. The rate for women is around 20%. So it's a significant issue for women. It's become strongly on the policy agenda in the UK around tackling female mental health during the period of pregnancy and the year afterwards. But again, services just haven't caught up with the fact that actually a lot of guys are experiencing problems, and the evidence says that this has a negative impact on female partners and also child development up to 5 years old. So. But what guys wanted was something that was framed around their what they saw as their role. They saw that when we spoke to men who were new fathers, that they saw their role as primarily being around supporting the mother and keeping the family unit stable. And what they were interested in were resources that recognised their role in that respect and their identity. A lot of guys, when we spoke to them, they didn't see that mainstream midwifery services and maternity services should be targeted towards them. So, well, that should be on the woman, but something that helps me help my wife or partner through this process would be valued. So framing things around those resources, around what men see as their key to their identity as new fathers, was seen as being more acceptable, more appealing. We know from a lot of the work that seeking and accepting support can be really uncomfortable for a lot of guys, particularly those guys who have constructed an identity of being an independent, self-reliant, self-determining man for their entire life. Men who have often not expressed feelings of requiring support or need to even their closest relatives and partners for their entire life. So it can be really difficult for a man to be able to say, look, I'm struggling here, I'm really struggling and I need some support. But from a mental health and plus from a physical health perspective, I've currently got a grant under review at the moment looking at the support needs of men with multiple sclerosis, because the evidence shows that men who age with multiple sclerosis have a lot of unique challenges in reframing and rearranging their life so that they can continue with things like work, social events, home maintenance, as they progress with their condition. And the evidence shows that women are much better at doing that, are much better at rearranging their lifestyle so they can continue with aspects of their life that are important to them. And women have a great self-efficacy and great resilience as well. And often, if you look at the evidence of men with multiple sclerosis, it's similar to men with a lot of other conditions. They just carry on as they were doing before without, I don't need to change my diet, I don't need to stop going to work, I don't need to slow things down. because all those things are so important to me. And if I do that, if I do start slowing down, then my life's probably not even going to be worth living. So what's the point? So recognizing that and then providing support that builds on those aspects of the identity of men's identities that they see as important can be a way of delivering services that are more accessible, more appealing, more congruent with who they see themselves as and what they need in order to maintain that level of self-identity. This I really like, which was the Men's Health Forum in the UK. They did a couple of years ago. Mental health was the focus of Men's Health Week, and they did a bunch of these posters to try and dispel myths around how difficult it can be for men to admit that actually I'm struggling with my mental health. And they did a bunch of them. Rather admit that. I mean, I think Justin Bieber's become a little bit more acceptable since this couple of years. You know, I don't mind. He's Canadian as well, isn't he? Yeah. But there were others, like I'd rather admit I couldn't drive, I'd rather admit that I couldn't get it up, things like that, trying to dispel the stigma. I think we did a recent review with a master's student of mine on suicide prevention strategies. I think this is from yours, John, actually. That actually you can reframe help seeking so it actually builds on key aspects of men's identities, so that those feelings of feeling like your identity is threatened can be taken away. So seeking support can be viewed as feminine behaviour, but it's been found to be re-evaluated by Canadian men who John has studied, who experience depression. It can be a rational, practical decision and something that's necessary to re-establish control and safeguard survival. So orientating help seeking around things like one's responsibility to one's family, or that it's something that can enable you to continue to live in a way that you want to live, can be a way a way in to get men to access services. Leveraging support networks is something that comes across in a lot of the work that I've done as well. In men with long-term conditions, I should say in the work that I did for my PhD, which was on men who experienced cardiac chest pain, men's partners were really important in their narratives. You know, a lot of guys would wait with the chest pain, and then eventually they would disclose it to their partner, and that it was their partner then who gave them the kick and, I'm going to call the doctor for you. When you speak to men who are living, have just been diagnosed with long-term conditions, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. The interactions that they have with their partners and with their close family and friends in terms of legitimising and supporting men to access services, either going along with them or providing them with validation that actually this is a good thing for you to do and you have my support to do this. And considering it in the advertising and marketing and referral of services, there's indications in the evidence that could lead to positive outcomes. Now, there's no empirical evidence to show that it does, to my knowledge, but yet it's still been used a lot in mainstream media. So this is something that a recent campaign that's been done in the UK around mental health, which seems to have captured the public's imagination in terms of men and mental health. It's around being in your mate's corner and sort of reframing this, sort of using masculine, hegemonic masculine ideals to legitimise help seeking for mental health problems. In this case, boxing. You know, I'm in your corner here. I'm here. Your mates are here. They can help you. What we don't know is whether or not this leads to positive outcomes, do we? Nobody's done a formal evaluation of this type of thing. We can talk about the reasons for that in men's health over coffee, perhaps. Again, what we found in our review of suicide prevention strategies, that a sense of connectedness to family, friends, mental health professionals is an important factor in preventing male suicide, having those connections. One of the key things that we really found in the review that we did on men with long-term conditions and self-management support is this idea of of engaging in support, men engaging in support shoulder to shoulder as opposed to face to face. So supporting men, when you look at the evidence around men who have taken part in support programs when they have been diagnosed with a long-term condition, they do emotional support with each other. They do peer support with each other. Men do peer support, and peer support is a really important aspect of support programs for men with a range of conditions. But the way that they do it can be a lot different to the way that women do it. And unfortunately, existing support services tend to be constructed around a face-to-face model of service delivery. Let's all get round and talk and introduce yourself, and then we'll have a group interaction. And for a lot of men, that can be really off-putting. It can be off-putting for a lot of women as well. But particularly for a lot of guys who are not really comfortable a lot of the time in sitting around and just introducing themselves and talking. But when this occurs almost as a byproduct of other activities that are going along, then that can work really well. So it's almost as an accidental thing that happens as a result, a byproduct of other activities. So not having emotional support, mental health support as an explicit focus of interventions could work to make things appear more appealing. At least men think then, well, I'm not going to be asked to go along and start talking about myself, am I? That's just not something that I want to do. Another interesting finding that we identified in our review of men with long-term conditions was that exchanging information, technical knowledge about management of conditions, about diagnoses, about treatments, can work as a support mechanism as well. Sharing technical information like that, so providing opportunities for that to occur can be a way of providing emotional support amongst men. So this is the paper that I wrote on the qualitative review that we did on self-management support. So we found that some men, and again, the caveat of a lot of this is this is not all men. Some men may prefer to tackle emotional issues sideways on as a byproduct of other shared activities. Intimacy and emotional sharing can become hampered if it's made too explicit, particularly as an initial goal of support activities. So if you're expecting a lot of men to go along and this is an initial goal of what you want them to do, start sharing the emotions, it's going to be work as a barrier a lot of the time. Active participation is the fifth thing that I found in the review of the evidence that I've generated in my program of research. And it shows quite clearly that active participation and interventions that have a problem-solving element are often seen as being more appealing than those that involve men as a passive participant. Active can mean actually physically active, so exercise-based interventions, things like cardiac rehabilitation programs, where the uptake in men is much greater than the uptake in women. And one of the reasons we think that is because it's an intervention that is broadly appealing to men. It involves exercise, supervised exercise, and problem-solving type activities, supervised by physiotherapists a lot of the time, who are wearing tracksuits. It's got sports orientation. You can see why that would be appealing to a lot of guys. Things like the men's sheds intervention involves active participation. Men go along there and they do things. You're involved in doing things, and while doing things, other things might happen. You might start talking about things as a byproduct. I haven't gone along to the shed in order to actually feel like I want to share things, but it might happen as a byproduct, and that's great. I'm involved at the moment in an intervention called Men's Pie Club, which is a Movember-funded intervention at the Social Innovation Fund. Did you get one, John? As part of the social?
Andrew got one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is an intervention that targets men who are socially isolated. Men are invited along to eat pies, cook pies, talk about pies, and talk with each other. Now, I wasn't involved in the funding application for this, but they've got me on board because they've got this money and they haven't got a clue what the intervention actually is, which happens a lot in men's health. They have these innovative ideas, and Movember are really good at doing it. They they fund something that it sounds like a really great idea, and it probably is a really great idea, but it really lacks a scientific, robust basis that would enable any sort of scalability a lot of the time. Now, not all are like that, but the Pie Club's one. They don't riff. Is it a health lifestyle? Is it about promoting healthy eating, or is it around mental health outcomes? Is it around improving social well-being? So they got me involved, and we're going to apply for some funds to develop a logic model and do some behaviour change work to identify what the actual intervention is, and then hopefully get to a stage where we can test it. But I love the idea of guys connecting over pies. Like a pie is a real important signifier of maleness in the UK. Certainly is in Australia.
Meat pie. Yeah.
Meat pie, and also I think in a lot of Western societies. Now the problem we'll have is how do you play off this sort of unhealthy pie eating with a health-based public health intervention, for all intents and purposes, a public health intervention. So we're going to have to figure that one out. But it's been run by a community interest company, a not-for-profit community interest company called Food Nation. So they're really passionate about getting anybody involved in food generally. But if you think about the target demographic that we're going to aim this intervention at, is men who are socially isolated and often have multimorbidity as well. So, nutrition generally will be a good thing for these guys, I think, rather than thinking about other things. It's good to see you, Elizabeth. But the key message here is that this sort of active problem-solving approach, getting men involved, that leads to concrete results, a tangible what's the point, can be really appealing, and particularly important for men who are living with chronic illness. 6 out of 8 is using online facilities. Online communities for men with long-term conditions and other conditions can be a way in, can be a really good way in, and enable men to dip the toe into the water, to start sharing information, to allow them to open up, that can then subsequently lead on to face-to-face interventions as well. So we've known for quite some time that online communities can be attractive spaces for men, but and this is one good example of that. But it doesn't need to be an end in itself. It can be an end in itself as the intervention alone, but what we found was that face-to-face self-management support interventions for men with long-term conditions can be made more appealing if they add an online component that allows men to initially engage and then build up or dispel that sort of initial fear that actually this is going to be okay, and then they can then subsequently attend. This is a paper that John and I wrote with one of our master's students, which I'm sure John will remember. But it actually led to a really nice paper. It took a long time coming. We found that the key to men's depression self-management, ongoing access to reliable resources and evidence for a lot of young guys was really important. And when you look at the evidence around men's use and just everybody's use of the internet, actually, that it's often described as like, where do I go? There's so much information out there. So providing a steer in what might be useful can be helpful. Penultimately, considering the environment, where are these interventions delivered? How can they be delivered in places that are more appealing to men? And this is one of the reasons why I'm really interested in the Men's Pie Club, is that my colleague Kate Hunt, who is a professor at the University of Stirling now in Scotland, led a programme of research called Football Fans in Training, which is a weight management service for men with overweight and obesity. And she did a randomised controlled trial of this intervention, which was based around guys turning up at a local soccer club in Scotland, having some group teaching around healthy eating and lifestyle, and then they got to do a bit of exercise at the club They were given the jerseys for their favourite teams, and Kate led a randomised controlled trial of this intervention that showed that it worked. It was effective in terms of weight loss, both in the short and medium term, and also the guys loved it. Like, there was a really low attrition from it as well. Off the back of that, we've really there's been a series of different interventions based around sport. So there's the power play program that and stuff that's been orientated around hockey. There's been a program that's based around rugby league in the UK called State of Mind, which targets improves men's mental health around rugby league. And so sports clubs have become like this almost like magic bullet for delivering interventions for guys. And what I'm interested in is identifying other environments, other places where you can target and deliver interventions that are perceived to be appealing to men. Because not all guys like sport. A lot do, but not all do. And that can be going to a local sporting stadium can be a real off-putting thing for a lot of guys. There's been other work, things like barbershops have been used as well, but again, the actual evidence base is not really there about to really provide good policy guidance around what might work. But certainly what we know is that considering non-healthcare environments can really work in terms of delivering interventions and offering a more safe and private and trusted space. What's considered to be a safe and trusted space for men, what we found was that it depends on who those guys are. Are the young guys with testicular cancer, gay men with HIV go into a support group, older men with rheumatoid arthritis. It varies depending on who they are. And what we also found was that who guys see as their peers greatly differs as depending on context as well. And we've just found that with Pie Club, is that they're running these Pie Clubs already, and they've just got, I was on the advisory group teleconference last week, and the guy who facilitates it was saying, a lot of these guys end up finding that they haven't got a lot in common with each other. So, and the reason why is that they had a bunch of guys who had learning disabilities there, and then a bunch of like 50-year-old working men as well. And you think, well, it would have been pretty obvious to me that you might not get that sort of peer group support if you have such difference amongst the group there. So, and I was trying to emphasise to them, you will not, this intervention, it won't be for everybody. You've got to work out who your target group is. You might be able to have a Pie Club for men who've got learning disabilities, or you might be able to have a Pie Club for men who are blue-collar workers or who are whatever, but you've got to think you're not going to have a one-size-fits-all intervention, and that's fine. You've got to think about who you're specifically targeting this at. So sports-based activities we know work. Community-based informal support centres, we know that works. What I would like to see and what I'm interested in, like I said, is working out where are the other environments, where else can we think about delivering services. And finally, the fan message from all the evidence that we've done is that there is no one size fits all. Men are not this homogenous, monolithic group of people who you can target with one particular type of intervention. Gender is not a standalone determinant of health. It's not a standalone construct. It intersects with other things in age, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. And so unpicking those different influences, those different aspects of men's identities, and working out how it intersects with health services, interaction with health services and their experience of ill health is the key, I think, to developing services that are more sensitive to gender. And we found that, and have written it a lot in some of the papers that we've written. And also the difference between men and women is not always as stark as what you might think in certain contexts and certain conditions. And we found that in a paper that I wrote with Pam and Joy on a research project that we worked on here at UBC, where we found that actually you just couldn't parse these types of behaviours into distinct gendered patterns. There was a lot of nuance and complexity there. And I think we're getting there with men's health, really. We kind of started off with the binary approach, didn't we? But now we're getting a lot more savvy to the nuance and the complexity in men's narratives. So, overall, key messages, what we found. If we take account of men's identities, and when I've delivered presentations like this to service providers and commissioners, I've just said to them, look, speak with your male service users, speak with them, find out what's important to them, and take account of that in the delivery of your service. And that can have real benefits in terms of making things more appealing. The key headlines that we found from our review of self-management support was that if we think about context, where an intervention is delivered, who men's peers are, what the environment's going to look like, the content of the intervention. For example, making it action-orientated, making it problem-solving, making the content so that it involves men and they're not a passive recipient. The delivery style, making it practical, again, problem-solving, and thinking about marketing and referral as well, so that there's an emphasis on what's the point, what is the unmet need that this is going to address for men, could lead to improvements. Now, what I've been trying to do since we did this is get an actual intervention, a development and testing of an intervention funded, without success today, because, like I said, it's a hard sell, but I'll get there eventually. And so we can test actually these things out and then be able to link them to behaviour change techniques as well. What are the types of behaviour change techniques that work and that are appealing to men? And I think that'll be a big leap forward for us. All right. I'm happy for these slides to be shared, so for people who weren't able to make it today, then they can take a look at some of these papers which I used to draw on the content for this presentation. Thank you.